Pyrakmon was enveloped by the dark energy of the ether. His mind had begun to dissect. How did he absorb the serpent chaos, he thought? That being was birthed from the black ether. Only I should be able to control it. Ether was his alone to command, he thought. Yet there it was, another able to harness pure chaos itself. An uneasy smile turned in the corner of Pyrakmon's mouth. Maybe there is someone strong enough to impose order, after all, he thought. I have to test this. He likely only sent me to Tartarus. I will immediately return once I land. As soon as the ether deposited Pyrakmon into Tartarus, a ping shot into the mind of Coeus. He is here, Coeus sternly stated, in a notifying way. The World Forger is here. All the rebellion became alert. Cronus, doing his best to position himself on his scythe, still exhausted from regressing the dying sunship, sent to Tartarus by Pyrakmon. The moment Coeus said that Hyperion searched the space of Tartarus and found Pyrakmon. I got this, he said, creating a vortex of pressure locking Pyrakmon in place. Once Pyrakmon landed, he summoned the ether to him to escape, but something was wrong. The ether drew in slowly, and the pressure against his physique was immense even for Tartarus. Pyrakmon used the ether to search Tartarus for any possible problems. Within the essence of the ether were a group of hollow shapes. Pyrakmon ignited the fraction of ether he could still command, hurling his body through the crushing pressure of the abyss. He struck the centre of the crater like a falling star. The impact was absolute. His boots shattered the obsidian floor of Tartarus, sending dark shards flying into the gloom. He stood amidst the debris, a monument of sovereign order. His dense, corded muscles hissed, steaming with the heat of the primordial ether. Behind him, the heavy crimson mantle snapped in the shockwave of his landing, held fast by the golden gorget that pulsed with a dull, rhythmic light. Solar gold encased his limbs, the braces and greaves unyielding against the harsh atmosphere. Above his regal, dark beard, his eyes burned with that piercing, ethereal blue. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, calculating the rebellion with the cold, predatory precision of an architect. Immediately the atmosphere of Tartarus, this jagged realm of eternal descent, began to freeze into a terrifying, crystalline stillness, as Hyperion exerts the full weight of his immortal High One unto the World Forger. His fingers weaving through the invisible threads of the vacuum. You are merely a smith, Pyrakmon. Hyperion's voice carries the resonance of a collapsing empire. But I am the sovereign of the void. With a brutal closing of his palm, Hyperion invokes the absolute zero. The spatial medium of Tartarus begins to solidify around Pyrakmon, transitioning from air to a viscous, light-bending sludge, then to an absolute, diamond-dense cage. Hyperion begins to delete the volume of the space Pyrakmon occupies, shrinking the dimensional frame into a non-existent sliver. Pyrakmon's frame groans under the weight of volume he cannot bypass. He attempts warping the ether, but Hyperion has commanded the local constant to cease. There is no force to manipulate. Pyrakmon is a prisoner of an empty tomb. Realizing any internal force would be pointless, he stops resisting the pressure. Instead, he reaches into his primordial core, back to the moment before the word was spoken. The frame. Pyrakmon's voice is a tectonic shudder, echoing from the marrow of creation. The frame is only as strong as the ink it was drawn with, Hyperion, and I hold the ether. Pyrakmon's singular eye doesn't glow. It bleeds the first pulse. He pushes past the limits he once thought. Hitting the full output of World Forger, he begins to seep in the dark energy reality itself, the pressure piercing into the pressurized void like glass breaking. A raw energy begins to gather of ether. The resulting eruption is not a mere explosion. It is a reality fracture. Hyperion's laws are stripped away like dry leaves in a hurricane. Pyrakmon releases the Genesis detonation. The blast is a primordial strike that rewrites the local code of Tartarus into an unformed nightmare. As the blinding white-violet shockwave expands, it leaves behind raw, seething, burning energy, enveloping the atmosphere. As Hyperion writhes on the ground, his body a chaotic map of micro-supernovas, Pyrakmon walks toward him through the searing radioactive heat. He doesn't even shield his eyes from the blinding light of Hyperion's internal collapse. He reaches out with a foot encased in solar gold, pushing the scorched giant's head back into the obsidian shards. With that uneasy, cold smile, he looks down and says, "You wanted to be sovereign of the void, didn't you? Well, look at you now. You are finally one with the vacuum. Every atom of your body is finally doing exactly what the space around us all are, scorching with primordial percussion, burning for my amusement. Hey, hey, hey." The sound is wet, a gurgle of scorched lungs and ionizing radiation. Hyperion looks past the golden boot pressing into his neck. His eyes, once masters of the void, now leaking raw white light. He finds the eyes of his brothers. "Hey guys," Hyperion rasps, the atoms of his jaw already beginning to drift into plasma. "Kill this asshole." "Hyperion!" Coas's scream is a frantic calculation of what is coming, but he's too late to stop the math. Hyperion stops fighting the pressure. Instead, he reaches out and pulls the vacuum of Tartarus into his chest, folding the infinite mass of the abyss into the thousands of nuclear reactions screaming in his cells. The fusion is instantaneous. He doesn't just explode, he unmakes himself. A Big Bang-esque supernova erupts from the point of his heart, a blinding white hole expansion that disintegrates Hyperion's physical form back into the all. The shockwave isn't just fire, it is a wall of pure non-existence travelling at the speed of thought. As the supernova expands, Pyrakmon doesn't flinch. He realises the physical vacuum has been replaced by a force that ignores conventional armour. He pulls the ether in tight, wrapping it around his solar gold frame like a secondary skin. The white-violet energy of the Big Bang slams into the dark ether, creating a friction point where the two primal forces grind against each other. Pyrakmon is driven backward, his boots carving deep trenches into the obsidian floor as he fights to keep his existence from being overwritten by Hyperion's dying strike. Behind the blast wave, the core of the rebellion stands firm. Iapetus, the prime mortal, has extended his aura into a jagged, translucent dome. Seeing Pyrakmon reeling, Iapetus hesitates, his hand glowing with the cold light of negation. "Should I dampen the architect's ether?" he asks, his voice tight with the strain of holding their defensive perimeter. "No," Curious commands, his eyes darting across the battlefield as he processes the new variables. Look at Crius. Crius stands in the centre of the fallout. His original form is gone, scorched away by the Big Bang energy. But instead of falling, his power level is spiking in a jagged vertical line on Curius's mental map. The excessive hardship of the explosion has pushed Crius to his absolute limit. His skin, already blackened and hardened, begins to shed in heavy obsidian plates. From beneath the charred husks, a new light emerges. Not the cold blue of Pyrakmon or the white light of Hyperion, but a raw, pulsing magma gold. Crius's new form is streamlined for pure output. His muscles are translucent, revealing the nuclear core he absorbed from Hyperion's death. He isn't just matching Pyrakmon's power level anymore, he is climbing past it, Coas says. Crius is currently a closed-loop system of thermal and kinetic escalation. If you negate the ether around him, you'll disrupt his evolutionary curve. You would only harm him now. Beside them, Cronus leans heavily on his scythe. He is a ghost of his former self, his frame trembling from the sheer cost of reverting the sunship's timeline. He is too severely wounded to join the fray, his essence depleted to the marrow. He can only watch his brothers battle the tyrant. Crius lunges across the obsidian crater, his new form leaving scorched footprints that melt the stone instantly. Pyrakmon raises his solar gold bracers, attempting to weave a lattice of ether to parry the blow. But Crius is too fast. The first strike is a brutal, overhead hammer fist. When Crius's magma gold knuckles collide with Pyrakmon's ether shield, the sound isn't a crash, it's the sound of glass shattering. The shield of sovereign order, which had withstood the vacuum of the void, spiderwebs and disintegrates under the sovereign slayer. Output. Pyrakmon is driven to one knee, the obsidian floor beneath him pulverizing into dust. For the first time, the blue glow his predatory precision, finally showing a flicker of genuine shock. "You're slowing down, Architect," Crius growls, the heat radiating from his body, turning the atmosphere into a shimmering haze. Each attack Pyrakmon tries to use to protect himself only empowers Crius. "You call us miscalculations, Pyrakmon." Crius's voice is no longer human. It's a dual-tone frequency that vibrates the very air. "But you forgot that a system that cannot adapt is a system that is already dead." Crius lunges. He doesn't need a vortex or a vacuum. He moves with the spontaneous speed of the explosion he just ate. The constant pressure from Crius's super-powerful form didn't just crack Pyrakmon's ether armor. It has now broken over half the solar golden armor Pyrakmon wore, leaving him severely injured. Pyrakmon barely able to recover his footing each encounter before Crius is on him again, moving with a speed that defies the even god logic. As Crius pins him against a massive obsidian spire and raises a fist to deliver a final, skull-shattering blow, Pyrakmon feels the heat of the supernova form melting the gorget at his throat. In this moment of pure, raw panic, his mind retreats past the order and into the void. With a desperate, guttural roar, Pyrakmon stops trying to block the physical force. He lunges forward. Enough! Pyrakmon's voice a jagged snarl of survival. He clamps his hands around Crius's head, ignoring the skin-searing heat, forcing the ether to condense into a suffocating, pressurized sphere. Not a calculated maneuver, but a frantic move of desperation. The bubble snaps into place, cutting off the reality of Tartarus from Crius's senses. The transition is violent. Crius's fist, mid-swing, loses its momentum as his brain is suddenly flooded with the existence of nothingness. The adaptive biology, which had been revving up to destroy Pyrakmon, suddenly finds no friction, no heat, and no enemy to match. The adaptive logic crashes into a loop. To survive the void, I must become the void. Pyrakmon collapses as the bubble takes effect, his solar gold armor dented and smoking, his breathing ragged and shallow. He watches from the ground as the sovereign slayer shrivels and reverts, the magma light dying out of Crius's eyes. Now, attack! Coas's voice cuts through the ringing silence of the supernova's aftermath. He doesn't wait for a reply. He knows the window is measured in milliseconds. Pyrakmon is still on his hands and knees, his ether-exhausted lungs heaving. He looks up, his blue eyes dimming, as two pillars of the rebellion close the distance. Coas and Iapetus begin to wail on Pyrakmon. In an attempt to defend himself, he tries to shield his form with ether, to no avail. The fight has descended into a visceral, bone-crushing brawl. Pyrakmon is caught in a storm of strikes. Every time he reaches into his core to pull the ether, he feels a sickening sensation of nothingness. It is like trying to draw breath in a vacuum. Iapetus's fists don't just hit with physical weight, they carry an empty finality with them. Iapetus catching Pyrakmon with a brutal hook to the jaw, followed by a knee to the gut that buckles the architect's warped solar gold breastplate. Coas follows up with a series of precision strikes to the throat and eyes. Pyrakmon collapses, his regal beard matted with thick, ether-rich blood. He gasps, his hands trembling as he tries to weave a simple spark of light, but the air around his fingers remains dead. What is this? Pyrakmon coughs, a mixture of blood and disbelief. What did you do to my powers? I am the architect. The ether belongs to me. Coas stops his assault, standing over the bloodied architect with a look of cold, intellectual satisfaction. He gestures toward Iapetus, who is standing with his fists clenched, his skin radiating a dull, light-eating darkness. You speak of the ether as if it were a law you wrote, Pyrakmon, Coas says, his voice ringing with the clarity of a theorem. But laws are only valid if they are observed. You forgot the nature of the immortal standing before you. Iapetus is not a smith, nor is he a king. He is the prime mortal. His ability is the negation of the powers. In this radius, you aren't an architect. You are just a man of flesh and bone. And as you can see, flesh breaks quite easily. Pyrakmon pushes himself up. It's a slow, agonizing movement. The sound of his own cracked ribs grating against each other is audible in the silence of Tartarus. He reaches up and unlatches the golden gorget. The heavy, tattered crimson mantle falls into the ash. Then, with a grunt of pure exertion, he rips the dented solar gold breastplate from his chest, tossing the divine metal aside like trash. He stands there, bare-chested and bloodied, his corded muscles gleaming with sweat and etheric discharge. He looks less like a king and more like a butcher. He draws in a deep, wet breath and spits a thick glob of blood right at Coas's feet. I may have forgotten his abilities, Pyrakmon rasps, his voice dropping into a register that vibrates in their very marrow. But you have forgotten one core thing. You have forgotten the true nature of power. He begins to walk toward them, his gait heavy and unstoppable. You think power is the ether. You think power is the logic or the void. Those are just the toys I use to decorate the world. He clenches his fists, massive, calloused hands that have hammered the foundations of reality. True power is the will to endure. I existed before the rules were written. I am the one who stood in the fire before there was a name for heat. Iapetus lunges, confident in his negation field. He throws a punch meant to shatter Pyrakmon's ribs, but the architect doesn't dodge. He takes the hit. The impact echoes through the crater, but Pyrakmon doesn't even flinch. Before Iapetus can pull his hand back, Pyrakmon's hand snaps out like a trap, grabbing Iapetus by the throat. Your 0 means nothing to a man who started with nothing, Pyrakmon growls. He drives a brutal short-range punch into Iapetus's face, the sheer physical kinetic energy, pure muscle and bone, sending the negator reeling. Kyus tries to intervene, using his precision to strike at Pyrakmon's pressure points, but the architect is in a primal flow. He catches Kyus mid-air, slams him into the obsidian floor, and follows up with a heavy boot to the chest. He is fighting with a savagery they weren't prepared for. He isn't editing them, he is breaking them. Despite the 2-on-1 disadvantage, Pyrakmon is a whirlwind of violence. Every time they hit him, he seems to grow more solid, his sovereign order manifesting as a physical refusal to fall. Kyus and Iapetus are being driven back. They are the ones who are bleeding now, their logic failing against the raw, unadulterated strength of the man who forged the world with his bare hands. Pyrakmon stands over them, his eyes, even without the etheric glow, burning with a terrifying, human ferocity. I am not the architect because I hold the ether, he roars, catching a punch from Kyus and crushing the giant's hand in his grip. I hold the ether because I am the only one stronger than the chaos. Kyus, his vision blurring from the tectonic force of Pyrakmon's fists, looks across the shattered obsidian floor. He finds Cronus. There is no magic left, no psychic bridge, only the heavy silent nod of a brother who knows the math has reached its final, tragic sum. I am sorry, the look says. The rest is on you. Pyrakmon doesn't give them a moment for a formal goodbye. He turns his back on the broken Iapetus and Kyus, walking toward the shivering, weakened Cronus with the heavy, rhythmic tread of a conqueror. Cronus, trembling from the soul-deep exhaustion of the sunship reversal, tries one last act of defiance. He throws a desperate shaking punch. Pyrakmon doesn't even break his stride. He slips the blow with a predator's grace and reaches out, snatching the scythe of entropy from Cronus's weakened grip. The weight of the weapon, the very edge of time itself, feels right in Pyrakmon's hands. He stares at the blade, his bloodied face reflecting in the dark, hungry metal. Entropy, huh? Pyrakmon lets out a short, dry breath that might have been a laugh in another life. This should do nicely. Pyrakmon stands over Kyus, whose bloodied lips are curled into that maddening, intellectual smile. What's that smirk? Pyrakmon asks snarkily, his voice dripping with the irritation of a god who hates being a punchline. He doesn't wait for an answer. With a jagged, horizontal sweep, he sends the scythe through the space between Kyus's shoulders and his head. The mind of the rebellion doesn't scream. He simply disintegrates, his calculations ending mid-thought as his form vanishes into a swirl of fine silver dust. Kyus! Cronus gutters from the floor, his voice a hollow shell of his former power. Pyrakmon ignores him, his eyes already fixed on the shivering form of Iapetus. Let's see you negate this, he snarls. The scythe descends like a N anvil. The 0 meets the end. Iapetus is extinguished instantly, his conceptual silence replaced by the ultimate silence of the all. Finally, Pyrakmon turns to Kyus. The giant is still kneeling, trapped in the existence loop. Pyrakmon forced upon him. He isn't a warrior anymore. He is just a statue of flesh, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at a nothingness only he can see. Pyrakmon walks up to him, the scythe of entropy trailing behind him, carving a shallow groove in the obsidian. He looks down at the helpless giant and then turns his head to look at the broken Cronus. He's so cute, isn't he? Pyrakmon says, his tone mocking and maternal, a terrifying contrast to the blood-soaked scene. It's such a shame I have to put him down. Without a hint of hesitation, Pyrakmon swings. The scythe of Cronus whistles through the air, catching Crius across the throat. Because Crius had reverted to simply existing, he has no defences left. The blade cuts through him like wind through smoke. The Sovereign Slayer dissolves into a pile of magma-hot ash that quickly cools into dull grey soot. No! The scream seemingly coming from the very fabric of time. Cronus using every ounce of strength he has left in his existence, he reaches into the very essence of entropy to the events that just occurred. Tartarus turns into a blur of backward motion. The ash of Crius leaps from the floor, swirling back into a towering form of magma gold. The silver dust of Coeus and the dark void of Iapetus condense, pulling their souls back from the all through sheer chronological force. Pyrakmon is yanked backward, his armour flying back onto his body, the scythe of entropy ripped from his hand and returning to Cronus. The timeline screams as it is forced to unhappen. Suddenly the air is still. The radioactive heat is gone. The obsidian floor is unbroken. Iapetus, Coeus, Crius and Hyperion are standing in their original positions, their bodies whole, their power levels peaked. But they aren't confused. The memories of the slaughter remain burned into their minds like a brand. They feel the phantom pain of the scythe. They remember the taste of the ash. In the centre of the circle, Cronus hits the floor. He isn't just tired, he is lifeless. He has paid a king's ransom of energy to buy them a second chance. The four giant sunships stood there, confused, the phantom truth of their deaths fresh in their minds. Pyrakmon, engulfed in the ether, being teleported to Tartarus, was a swarm of confusion. He remembers the blood he remembers sending them to the all yet what was that? Everything reversed. Why is he back here? The violet light of the teleportation corridor hasn't even fully dissipated when the trap springs. Pyrakmon is still processing the phantom memory of his victory, his mind a split second behind his physical reality. Before Pyrakmon's eyes can even focus on the crater, Coeus is already behind him. Using the data from the fist fight, where Pyrakmon humiliated him, Coeus doesn't engage in a brawl. He moves like a ghost to the exact blind spot he identified in the previous timeline. He drives 2 fingers into the base of Pyrakmon's skull, hitting the miasmatic stem. A shockwave of neural interference slams through Pyrakmon. His motor functions don't just slow down, they disconnect. His arms drop like dead weights. He is a prisoner in his own body before he can even think to take off his cape. As Pyrakmon's body begins to slump from the neural strike, Iapetus lunges forward. He doesn't use a blast or a weapon. He wraps his massive, stone-cold arms around Pyrakmon in a crushing bear hug. Iapetus flares his negation inward. He isn't negating the room, he is negating Pyrakmon's internal kinetic potential. He holds the architect in place, turning Pyrakmon into a static object. No matter how much ether Pyrakmon tries to summon, Iapetus erases the intent before it can reach his hands. Pyrakmon is paralysed and pinned, his eyes wide with a cold, fearful realisation. In the background, Hyperion is supercharging the ability of Crius by attacking him. Pyrakmon is pinned against Iapetus's chest, his head lolling forward. Blood, dark, shimmering and thick with miasma, pours from his mouth and spills onto Iapetus's arms. The architect of the world is broken. Coeus pulls back, his breath coming in jagged gasps. Iapetus maintains his grip, his eyes fixed on the floor, refusing to let go until he is sure the energy is gone. In the corner of the crater, Cronus lies still. He's barely breathing, a husk of a king, but he opens one eye just enough to see the blood on the floor. He has done it. He gave up his soul to buy his brothers this 1 second of perfect, non-logical revenge. Now Coeus says, the very moment before Pyrakmon motor senses return, and Crius reaches a god-killer form. Iapetus, Coeus and Hyperion move, giving room for Crius to unleash an energy attack that completely obliterates Pyrakmon. As the god-killer energy from Crius erupts, it doesn't just kill Pyrakmon, it unmakes him. Because Iapetus was negating his internal potential, Pyrakmon couldn't even ether drift his way out of the blast. The architect who was obsessed with order is erased by the very chaos and adaptation he tried to prune. The white-violet light fades. Tartarus returns to its jagged, eternal descent. There is no body left of the World Forger. only the scorched, cracked solar gold braces lying in the ash. The three standing brothers, Hyperion, Iapetus, and Caius, immediately turn away from the site of the execution. They don't celebrate. They rush toward the centre of the crater where the white-haired, lifeless Cronus lies.